G'day! What you're looking at here is a Nordmende 258W. It's an old tube radio, and as an example with this radio I want to show you how you would approach repairing a tube radio that you may have found or bought and you don't know whether it is working, and to do the procedures that are usually necessary to make it working again. The first procedure is just a visual looking. So you want to check if all the controls are working. The switch, for example, you want to hear, does it click? Do all the knobs and dials work? You want to look whether there are any burn marks inside the mechanics of the radio, and for that you need to turn it around and take a look inside. Usually there are, for example, nuts or bolts or any kind of securing mechanism that you have to untighten to get the back wall off. When you've got that off, then you can look inside the radio and see what is going on. So what we have here are the standard components that you will find in probably any radio. Here's the transformer, then in the back this is the speaker with the output transformer. Then we have the rectifier, the IF coils, a filter capacitor, a tuning capacitor, and then all sorts of tubes which are related to reception, oscillation tubes, and of course the amplifier tubes for the audio stage. When you look inside a radio, you want to first check if there is anything that is obviously faulty. For example, these capacitors have an opening at the top, and if there is anything coming out, like usually a white substance, then you know that that capacitor is faulty and you will need to replace it before doing anything. This is the selenium rectifier. They are also somewhat likely to fail over time. This one, however, looks intact. We will look at it from the bottom. If anything is coming out, then that one has to be replaced as well. Here's the transformer. If it looks burned, then you're in serious trouble. Sometimes you can still salvage it, but if there is a short in the winding, then basically the beating heart of the radio is no longer working, and you usually can throw it away if you don't find any cheap replacement. There are no tubes missing. These tubes are all looking fine. If the top of these, which in this case is black and in this case is silver, would be white, then that would show the tube has no longer gotten any vacuum inside and it needs to be replaced. Of course, any missing tubes usually need to be replaced. This here would be the Magic Eye tube. I luckily have a replacement for this, but this tube is not critical for the workings of the radio. What you want to do next is take a look underneath the radio. So it's upside down right now. You want to look inside the workings and see if there's anything burned or that has obviously failed, because that may indicate that something is going wrong in this radio that you would need to check first before you hook it up to full power. The next thing I will do is untighten these screws and take the chassis of the radio out so that I can take a look at it, clean it, and probably oil the controls if there is anything squeaky. Alright, so the radio is out of the housing, and you can see there is a fair bit of dirt inside. So I want to vacuum that all out, and the same thing here with the radio. Just take a brush and brush all the dirt out. I'm also going to lubricate the squeaky controls. They're a little bit stiff, and I will polish up these corroded shafts and get all the grime out of here. Okay, I got the majority of the dirt cleaned out. Took all the dust out, vacuumed the housing. This is very important because the dust inside a hot radio is not good. It's a potential fire hazard. I also crammed the rubber which would be there to hold the Magic Eye tube in also crammed that out of there. It's just a huge design fail. I don't know any radio where this stuff survived. Then I just took a brush, cleaned everything out, and I also cut the main lead wire because it was just very crunchy. And the first thing we're going to do is resolder that one and put a new cord on, and then we'll see what else needs to be done. By the way, I also lubricated the tuning capacitor and the rope works for the tuning system, and yeah. Well, the memory card went flat there, but as you can see I've replaced the cord, tied it down with some zip tie here, gonna snap that end here off, and we'll now start by replacing the faulty capacitors. I will go into that in more detail soon, but the first thing we're going to replace is this one, and so we don't forget it, also this one down here in the edge. There's quite a tight corner here, so you have to pay attention as not to hit anything else with the soldering iron. Remove that tube here. Now, to dissolve the old solder, you can always use more new solder, which will increase the flow. And you can take some flat pliers, try getting out there. That's one end unsoldered. Now we'll take some piece of wire or something to poke a hole into there. Okay, there we go. And now we'll unsolder the other end. Okay, there we go. And there's our capacitor. So let's do a little bit of theory around these. This one is quite a good example, as you can see inside of it. This is the typical type of wax capacitors which we will find in almost any radio up until maybe the 70s. And what this is basically a tube with two sheets of aluminium paper wrapped around each other and separated by another sheet of wax paper. This wax paper will act as an insulator for, let's say, 10 years, and then through these sheets of tar here, some humidity of the air will go inside of this capacitor. The wax paper will become conductive, and basically all this thing is no longer a capacitor, but much rather like a resistor or maybe even a dead short circuit. And these things, 99% of all of these will go faulty over time. Now when we take a close look at this, you will see some data put onto here. 1000 PF, 250 volts AC, 70 degrees Celsius, and then there's a parts number, and that's about it, and here's a brand mark. So, well, what you need to know is the 1000 picofarad and the 250 volts. That's what's important for you. 1000 picofarad is the capacity of this thing, and 250 volts is what voltage this thing must be able to withstand. Now, I always have 630 volt capacitors for all the work I do, which is more than sufficient for all of them. And the 1000 picofarad, well, you'll have to look through the parts lists and order them at some page which offers these. So let's get the replacement, and it looks like this. As you can see, it's quite a lot smaller than the new one. And what we'll do with this one now, as we have the insulation left and all the wire ends, we'll trim it to the same size and insulate all this the space that's not needed. So we'll just leave these two little places open to go into the parts that we unsoldered. Okay, here's the capacitor now insulated with some shrinking tube, and now it's going to go inside the radio back again. One thing you want to look for, as that's what pisses me off the most, is that the value is readable as is, so you don't have to twist it around when you want to replace it maybe in another 60 years. You know, just make it comfortable for whoever will work on it. Maybe it's yourself who needs to work on it back again. So always put it in so that you can read the value. So there's our first new capacitor with the value well readable, and we'll do that one in here. There it is. And when I've done that, I'm going to flip the radio upside down and do the ones underneath. Now we're looking underneath the radio here, and don't be afraid, not every component that you see needs to be replaced. So what you want to look for are wax foil capacitors. That's, for example, this one here, or this one you see underneath here. This one is also a wax foil capacitor, but all these red guys here, or this black one here, they're resistors. It says 2 kilo ohm here, and resistance is always given in ohms, kilo ohms, mega ohms, whatever, and capacitance is always given in farads, microfarad, picofarad, nanofarad, and so on. Also, not every capacitor that you see must be faulty. For example, when you compare this capacitor here to this one here, you can see that this one has a red sheet around it, and it is made from plexiglass or acrylic glass. And these capacitors are so-called styroflex capacitors, which are usually fine, or in 99% of all time they're fine. There's no problem with these, and there's no need to changing these. However, these ones which have tar at their end, to seal them off, they all have to go. Another type of capacitor which is usually fine is the ceramic capacitor. And a ceramic capacitor usually looks somewhat like this. They can also remain inside the radio. And another type of capacitor, which is most usually fine because they're also newer and more sophisticated, is this kind of capacitor. They have a propylene foil around them, which is also the type of capacitor which I put inside the radio. So if you see something like this, which is completely out of plastic, or this, they are also fine, because they are completely sealed in plastic and there's no way that humidity could go inside here and cause a short. So let's go on replacing all the faulty capacitors inside this radio, and you know, there's nothing really too interesting about this. All I do is write on the value, which would, for example, this one would be 0.1 microfarad, write down the value, see if I can get one like this, then see where the two contacts go. Well, this one would be this and this contact, unsolder the old one, resolder in a new one, and repeat process for all the other ones. And well, there's not much more to it. Okay, the next thing will be cleaning up these knobs. I usually use just some alcohol, and then we'll refurbish the rings around here with some silver paint, which I did to all my radios. Okay, so what we have here is a tiny can of silver paint and a toothpick. And what we're going to do, just go along this rim here. It's not a problem if anything goes off the side. I'm just going to basically flood the rim with paint. And everything that's left over on the sides is going to be washed away with a little bit of alcohol when the paint is dried.
Der umstrittene belgische Atomreaktor coule 3 produziert wieder Strom. Die Anlage hatte sich wegen eines Softwareproblems.
Okay, off camera I've made this little bracket over here to help fasten the magic eye tube. I thought about just renewing the rubber that was holding it originally, but you know, that method has failed before, and I've seen no other radio of this type which didn't have all this rubber glued up like hell. And you know, it seems like a pretty bad idea to hold a hot vacuum tube with a piece of rubber. So basically all I made is a bent piece of steel, of angle steel, and you know, just shaped it roughly, pinched it here with a screw, and then mounted it to the holder of the tube. That's all. It's nothing special, but you know, it's sure a lot more sophisticated than a piece of rubber. Alright, so the paint has dried, and what we're going to do now is take a rag and some spirit, and we'll wipe the excess back off again. It is rather time consuming to rub all this stuff back off again, but it's well worth the effort. Alright, here are the knobs. Don't look too bad. Pretty proud of how this turned out. This L, M, K, T, A and UK. You know, this looks pretty nice. And of course all the rings are pretty good as well. Alright, so they're ready to mount onto the radio as well. Okay, the very last thing that you want to check before powering up your radio is whether you actually have a speaker connected. Now you may think, well, there's a built-in speaker inside the radio, so why check it? Well, the speaker doesn't need to be working, obviously, and since it can happen that the output transformer arcs over with no load on it, you should better check the speaker for being intact before you actually do something. Now, you could of course just go ahead and take a multimeter and measure whether you have a contact on the external output jack, but that's not the right way to do it, because you will always measure the impedance of the output transformer if you're doing it that way. The real proper way to check whether the speaker is working is to actually check the speaker itself. So what we're going to do is put an audio signal into the speaker and see if it responds in any way, and then we know for sure that this speaker is working and is connected. Alright, with these two lugs we've got an audio input source, and we can either put it right into the external jacks.
In der Westhälfte einzelne, auch gewittrige Schauer. In der Nacht regnet es dann zum...
Okay, we know for sure the speaker is working now. If your radio should be a very early type or something of that sort, and it doesn't have an external output jack, then you can also check these on the contacts of the speaker directly.
6. Mein Name ist Katrin Schmick.
Just like that. So when you looked inside this radio before I actually did this measurement or these tests, then you will see that this speaker in here is different from the one that was in there in the beginning. That has the simple reason that the speaker on this one didn't work, and I checked it and there was no response, but I didn't have the camera running at that moment, and changing the speaker is actually rather simple. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's rather simple. You just have to take the entire radio out, so take the chassis out, then disconnect the two connecting points where the speaker lugs are tied to the transformer, desolder these, then loosen the 4 brackets that hold down the speaker, and then put a new one in, reconnect it, and that's it. The problem with these types of speakers is that the input cables are led through some rubbery distance holders, and they degrade over time, and the substance generated when it degrades actually corrodes the cables, and I wasn't able to resolder anything to it, and this speaker actually had the very same problem of corroded wires, but with this one luckily I was able to solder it. Okay, one other thing, and then we're for sure going to power this radio up. You can almost be sure that on the Magic Eye these two 1 mega ohm resistors have gone flat. In the radios of the 1950s era, for some reason they are all wrecked. I don't know why, but you can measure these, and when they're open then you can just replace them right away. It will just save you the hassle of not having a working Magic Eye right away. Okay, so let's power this thing up. Okay, so the radio is ready to be powered up. This is an AM receiver only, so we won't be able to pick up any good signals at the moment. It's obviously daytime and AM is as good as dead in Germany, so we'll have to wait for the night time to actually check on the receiver. But we can actually check the TA input, which means we are going to check the amplifier circuit, and we're going to do that with these two wires. There's just an audio source going in right now. And when you power up an old radio, then you want to make absolutely sure that nothing can happen. And, well, what is a good insurance, of course, is a light bulb hooked in series with the radio. This light bulb, when there is a dead short in the radio, the light bulb will go on full brightness and will limit the current that can go into this radio. So nothing can really get damaged if something is seriously wrong. And of course we are also going to see that and not just smell that when the whole thing starts catching fire. So we're going to fire the radio up right now. The bulb will go bright on because it's drawing a lot of current at the first moment, charging the capacitors, the tubes have to warm up and so on, and then it should dull right down. So here we go. You saw that it went on full bright at the moment, and now it's dulled completely down. You can barely see it in the camera, I guess. And what I can tell right now, I don't know whether you can see that actually, but this thing is now getting a little bit brighter as the tubes start to draw current. That tells us that the rectifier is working and producing voltage for the entire circuit, which the tubes can then use up. You can see it's gotten a little bit brighter there. So let's check whether the circuit is actually working, and we'll just increase the volume here. And sure enough, there you see the radio's playing again. And what we're going to do now is let this run for a while to make sure that nothing is getting wrong over time. And when it's turning nighttime, then we're actually going to see whether we can really receive anything of value on AM bands. Okay, we've got the radio set up now. It's a pretty primitive setup. On the right we've got the ground just going to the heater, and on the left the cable is going to my rim antenna, which you can see up there. And we're now going to scan through the bands. We're going to go long wave, medium wave and then short wave, just to see whether this thing is able to receive something. So here we go.
Que ça n'a pas évolué, donc on a très peur les jours qui précèdent et puis on se sent totalement soulagé les jours d'après.
The whole story was all about me seeing the lead singer of Primal Scheme eating a scone/scone. I didn't want a big argument about the pronunciation of scone, but that's what we're getting, apparently.
Someone who's gone there. So many aspects of, training ground sponsored, they've got sponsors coming out of there, whether it's people fleeing themselves to kind of be associated with them, or maybe they ask.
This capsized off the coast of Libya, and the Times says that at least 5 people have died.
Interés. Además, hay empresas chinas que ayudan al desarrollo de la zona.
No contamos, lamentablemente, en estos momentos con
A reform is to be found today within the grounds of the medieval fortress.
يسبح لله ما في السماوات.
Finishing in 1490.
Δεν θέλω να αναφερθώ ούτε στις εθνικότητες ούτε στα σημαία.
Okay, I think we can all agree that the repair on this thing was a success. We're right now tuned into Absolute Radio, and it's on 1215 kilohertz on medium wave, and it's coming in crystal clear.
Background noise less annoying than those leaf-blowing machines.
And actually, these kind of sound quality is not what I'm used from AM reception. I'm used to a lot of distortion, but this radio seems to pick it up just fine. So it's a great little radio. Also for the few amount of tubes that are inside, it's just incredibly strong. I've heard many different countries like Spain, Greece, Italy, England, France, and so on. So it's quite a valuable radio. The only problem is that it cannot receive FM. It has a scale and a switch position for it, but this particular radio has not been upgraded or fitted with an FM receiver. So that's it for this video. The repair is finished and it will play fine like this. And in the next video I'm actually going to upgrade this to be able to receive FM with an additional receiver inside, which is just connected to the switch position where it is supposed to receive FM actually. So that's what we're going to do next video. For this video that's it. I thank you very much for watching and I hope you enjoyed this series. Bye bye!